I have never in my life felt more control and more empowered than in this last decade that I've been working for myself. There's only one thing in the world that I do better than anyone else. It's only one thing, and that's to be myself. I love the idea that a woman can still be confident if she's single. I just don't think she should talk herself out of wanting something so natural as companionship.
This is the show for ambitious, material girls who are learning how to channel their chaotic energy into a more intentional and fun life. Don't be stupid. Listen to Too Smart for This. This is one of those episodes that's going to move you. I can promise you that, okay? Welcome back to Too Smart for This. My name's Alexis Barber, and I am just so grateful to be sitting down introducing the next guest for Too Smart for This, because I cannot believe that we were given this amazing opportunity to interview Pauline Brown in her home, and we got into everything. A trope about women in business, women who particularly came up in the 80s and 90s and are executives now, is that they are gatekeepers and that they don't sort of allow people in and that they make it hard for other women, whatever. I think that there's that trope in the media that older women are not there to help younger women, but Pauline is the absolute opposite of that. Not only do we get into genuine career trajectory and some actual advice about how you can manage your career from someone who's done it at the highest levels, okay? Pauline not only graduated from Wharton in 1995, go Quakers, is that what we are? Who knows? But both of us went to Wharton, and 30 years apart, there's so much that I learned from her, and it was so different back then, and we touch on what it was like to be at Wharton during that time, and then we get into her career trajectory, how she went from Bain to leading new business at Estée Lauder and acquiring both Bobbi Brown and Jo Malone, two absolute household names now, and then her time over at Carlyle Group, which is a large private equity firm, and how she made the pivot from that job, which just wasn't right for her at the time in her life, to becoming the chairwoman of LVMH North America, the largest luxury conglomerate out there, where she led over 70 brands across the categories. And make sure that you're subscribed to Too Smart for This on Instagram, Substack, TikTok, all of it, because we've got more than enough content. This month on Too Smart for This, we're talking about power, and who better to talk about power with than one of the most powerful businesswomen out there. So without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Pauline Brown. Welcome to Too Smart for This.
Thank you. I'm delighted to have you in my space, having such a smart woman.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
In my smart home.
Oh my gosh, your home is really everything I would aspire to have. I really have a little studio, and I'm like making it work until I buy something at some point, hopefully. But I just ordered literally a zebra, an animal print. All of it is my favorite. So you've done an amazing job, and I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you. Well,
but you are an aesthetic queen, I guess one could say.
Thank you. You know what? I have a point of view on aesthetics, but I really don't look at it as hierarchical. I think everybody has aesthetics. I think just some people are more aware of their aesthetics than others.
Absolutely. How long have you been aware of your aesthetics, you think?
Well, I've never codified it until this last decade of my career. I think it's been ever evolving. You know, the next book I'm writing about is all about decoding taste, how it actually gets formed. The first book that I wrote was about why it's so important and how to build it, whatever your starting point. The second book, which will be out in a while, is about how to discover your own taste and how to make sure that the way you express yourself to the world is aligned with a value system that is really at the heart of all good taste.
It's important. I think some people look to others for taste and don't define it for themselves at all. So I think that decoding and aligning it with your values will be a good self-reflection exercise.
That's what I'm hoping. That's what I'm hoping. I mean, we shouldn't look to other people to define our personalities. We don't do that. We know that we have personalities. We may be inspired by other personalities, but we are who we are. But we all too often seed our inner selves when it comes to things like style.
Oh, by all means, which I think you have a ton of experience in. So I would like to start off our mutual meeting point in our careers, which is the Wharton School, getting our MBAs. And I know you got your MBA in the 90s. So I'm curious, when people look at the 90s, I think we think of an era where a lot of pop culture sort of had its, inception. And so we can look at the 90s and think, oh, well, there's not so much that's different about the 90s as there is today when it comes to gender inequality or female ambition or something like that. So I'm curious for you, what was it like to be an ambitious woman at Wharton in the 90s? And
it was different. It was different. Yeah. And I can say that with some confidence, not just because I go back to campus, I sit on the board of one of the Penn centers, but also because I have taught at business schools, starting at Harvard and then more recently at Columbia. And, students, many of them are interchangeable. So I see firsthand who's coming through those doors today. The first thing I'll say, which right there, right with this one metric, should say define how different it was. When I went to Wharton, arriving in the fall of 1993, 27% of my classmates were female.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's at parity.
Yes.
There still is a lot of inequality as you go up the ladder and in certain careers or certain subsectors of business more than others. But at least in the classroom, there isn't. When you're in a classroom and you're only a quarter represented, and then of the quarter that were represented, we were a small group. And there were, little offshoots of it. But I remember even back then, and I wouldn't say it was all that different than as an undergrad, when women are a minority and they're in a group particularly with very powerful and confident men, they start to do one of two things. They start to either mimic the men in their behaviors, consciously or unconsciously, more unconsciously, or they kind of cower and become a little bit of shadows of themselves. It was hard, as I look back, to be the strong person I am today in that setting. But obviously I didn't give up.
Of course. How did that play into the romantic relationships of the time? People were going to get a husband or something, which is sort of the trope that people talk about, going to get your MBA for.
Yeah.
Or do you feel like the people who would be very at the opposite end of that and be like, I don't want to be anywhere near marriage or something like that because my career is so important? Were either of those two tropes at play?
I think they were both at play. I think there was certainly a segment of women for whom that was a priority. It wasn't a big portion of the small portion of women, but they were there. And many did end up marrying a classmate. Not all stayed married to those classmates, but many did. And then there were the other group that never going to give up on their career ambitions, but still weren't going to give up on the prospect of finding partnership and falling in love and all the things that are natural when you're in your 20s. Mm-hmm. And I would say, looking back, that my struggle then, and I wish I hadn't taken it personally, that as the woman who obviously fell in that latter camp, even if a man was attracted to me, he was not going to look at me as someone who could be his partner. The woman that he was going to marry, at least in marriage round one, was not going to look like his compatriot. She was going to look like somebody who was his yin to his yang. So it was slim pickings. I didn't date a lot while I was there. There was a lot of flirtation and there were attractions, but there were no serious prospects for me. And the things obviously changed, and I ended up having a great life, partnership-wise, decades thereafter, but did not end up with any of the men I went to school with back then or ever since.
I think that's probably my future as well in my situation. So I'm curious, was ambition in women considered attractive, or was it still socially risky at the time?
Oh, it was risky. I think it was risky. It wasn't for me. Number one, I come from a really long line of strong women who have had to be strong, have had to showcase their strength through extraordinary duress. I'm first generation American. All four of my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. In both sets of grandparents, it was the woman post-World War II who helped the family get back on their feet, who became, not by really choice, but by necessity, providers and businesswomen who were scrappier. Neither of them had the Wharton decree behind them, but they ended up doing quite well. And the family ultimately now, 3 generations, my kids 4, continued to thrive. But I saw that model of a woman who was I always describe her as the lioness. There were 2 different styles of lionesses across those 2 women that kind of helped mold me. And I'm a different style of lioness than they are, but we're all lionesses, which, if you think about that as a spirit animal, she's not a killer by design. She doesn't go out to kill for kill's sake. She's really very protective of her tribe. She does what she has to do to survive, and she does it elegantly, but she does it ferociously. So I think of that spirit animal often. And so because I had that model, it was very much a part of who I was, but it didn't make it feel accepted, or I didn't feel I had quite found my sisterhood while I was there at that stage. I still was who I was. And I think I got more comfortable with each passing era at being other and being good at being other.
At being other and being good at being other. And that means being a little bit more bold with what you wanted and audacious with what you wanted with your goals.
Being bold, but also being authentic, and also doing all that was important to me with grace and femininity and things that were also important to me. So as I said earlier, oftentimes women feel if they're going to achieve what is so commonly or has been commonly available to most men, that they have to be tough like a man. And that never felt right to me either. To this day, I was never going to give up on the idea that I enjoy makeup. I still wanted to represent myself professionally as something other than wearing, a pinstripe suit.
Absolutely.
It sounds superficial to talk about, makeup and clothing as sort of proxies for power. But I think for me, it's more that I always say good aesthetics is really just an outer expression of an inner value. And I was trying time and again to be connected with that inner value and that inner strength.
Was the aesthetics what you were trying to get at because you were looking for that inner strength? Because were your grandmothers and the women who were raising you and giving you such great strength, were they also aesthetically minded,
Very
would you
much
say?
so.
Yes.
Very much so. Again, I said they each had a different style, a different way of presenting themselves to the world. One of them was from Vienna. Actually, my father was born in Vienna, and she had sort of this very old world Habsburg influence. So it was a regal to her, but she was all about details and quality. And even when she came to the U.S. and didn't have a lot of means, what she bought had to be good within whatever budget she had to work with, which was often not much. My other grandmother was much more flamboyant, and that side of the family had fled to Cape Town, South Africa, where my mother was born and raised. She lived a very fanciful life. She liked to make things. She was crafty and, at least with her hands, and she was experimental. She wore bold colors. She did not do things with that same level of finesse and precision, but she did them with flair.
Mm-hmm. And so you have a little bit of both of those in
little bit of both
in yours now. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that's probably what gave you that strength then to keep that part of your personality while you were at Wharton and beyond.
I think so. I mean, keep in mind that probably would have seen a muted version of it, but I think it was always there.
Good. I'm glad. So when you left Wharton, you went to Bain.
Yes, that was my first job.
Yes. Tell me more about what influenced that decision.
It was purely practical. It covered my second year of business school, and I was paying my way. My parents helped me through college, and education was always a premium, so it wasn't something I was going to compromise on. But by the time I was in business school, I was on my own, and I didn't come there with a trust fund or with anyone supporting me. So number one, it was just a practical decision. Number two, and maybe more importantly, I had no idea what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I knew I wanted to work. I knew I had a lot to learn, and I knew that that'd be a pretty good starting point. I also knew, maybe not as consciously, that there was no way I was going to stay there long term, that it was not the right career for me for all sorts of reasons, but it was the right first step for me.
Mm-hmm. And what's something you learned there that you still take with you, that you still use to operate today?
So I often call that phase of my life, those few years at Bain, my MBA Part 2. And much of what I learned there was an extension and maybe an intensification of what I learned at Wharton, which was that frameworks are good. They help you solve problems by starting with a structured way of thinking about the problem. Analytics and good data. We have a lot of bad data that leads to bad decisions, but if you use good data and you analyze it wisely, it helps clarify complicated situations. I was an English major undergrad, so it wasn't like I was working with a lot of data before I got to Wharton. I'd never taken an accounting class. I'd never taken a finance class.
And Wharton makes you do a lot of
it. Makes it whether you want to or not. I wish in retrospect I would have done more of it, even though I would not have wanted to.
Me too.
And when I got to Bain, I think it kind of started to apply that in more real-world situations. What it didn't do, and why I was quick to say it was not the right career path for me, is it didn't give me any sense of ownership over the problems that were being solved.
That's what a lot of people, I think, face when they get to big corporations and they're really bright and excited, which is like a lot of people who go into consulting. So was that ultimately the reason you left, or did you find another opportunity that felt like it would align?
I had decided to leave before I found an opportunity. I didn't know where I'd leave, and I, was still collecting a paycheck. Technically, I guess I was still there. Whatever mental energy I had above and beyond the case studies that got me through the week was already focused on where can I go from here. I went to a career counselor. Nowadays, they call her a coach. Back in the 90s, that wasn't the term. She had me do an exercise, and I share this with you because it was so instructive that I still tell people to do the exercise. Ooh. She basically gave me about 100 or so cards. On every card was a descriptive of what a job or a career or even a particular company might be described as. So it could be anything from, pays a lot of money to involves a lot of travel, to has a big corner office, to has a very predictable schedule. No judgment. I had to take 100 cards and put them in piles. Highly desirable as an attribute for what I want, highly undesirable, and neutral. And at the end of the exercise, I probably had 20 or 30 in my desirable pile. And she said, okay, now we're going to take that and you have to pick your top 10. And top 10. Now that gets hard because you have to start to say, I thought I really wanted that, but I wouldn't put it in a top 10. And then I had my top 10 of most important things that I want in a career or a job. And I had to force rank them. That gets really hard. And then she said at the end of the exercise, you see these top 4 or 5? Those are your non-negotiables. Mm-hmm. So I start with 100 cards, of which off the bat, I could have gotten rid of 50 of them right away. But all of a sudden then, when I started to look at options or even possibilities, I had to go back to, well, that may be a great job, but that doesn't hit my non-negotiables. It doesn't meet the criteria. The reason I share that now, and this is, 35 years ago, whatever it was, 30 years ago, is that the things that were so important to me back then, not the things that may have been 20 on the list, but the things that were in that 5, 6, 7, 8, they're still really important. And every time I stray from them, and I still occasionally do, I live to regret it.
Oh my gosh. Will you share with us what some of them are?
Well, one of them is, and it explains where we are right now, I am a New Yorker through and through. So I talked about my grandmother's Vienna, Cape Town, but I grew up in New York, and there's nowhere else on this planet that I feel at home. Mm-hmm. I have lived other places occasionally, including Philadelphia. I've traveled a lot. I've worked for companies overseas. I even have a European passport because my father was born in Austria. Anywhere else I go, I always say, it's just not my people. It's not me at my best. Mm-hmm. So number one, I actually have to be in New York, which doesn't mean I can't leave it a lot, but I always have to come back to it. Mm-hmm. Number two, I have to be with really creative people. I don't have to be doing purely creative work. I'm not trained as an artist or a craftsperson, but if I'm not in an environment that is energized and is surrounded by creative people, I start to feel a little bit deadened, which also explains why Bain wasn't the place for me.
I was just going to say that.
They're not my people. They're not my people. 3, I'm a product person. When I was leaving Bain, a lot of my former classmates, certainly a lot of the people who were leaving Bain around the same time, were going to Silicon Valley. It was Internet 1.0. It was the same feeling you would get today about the sort of emergence of AI. And it seems like anybody, like going to California Gold Rush, right? Mm-hmm. You want to make it big, that's where you go. And I remember thinking they were going to Silicon Valley, Internet 1.0, either to start new ventures, whatever.com, or they were going to become investors, VC investors in these ventures. Neither of those paths appealed to me, even though that at the time seemed unstoppable and seemed like where all the money was and would be. Number one, because I'm a product person and technology is really not a product. I know they talk about product management. I know it can be productized in a way, but I like things that are tangible, that have a dimensionality to them, that can be produced even when I'm on vacation. My time is not my product. Even my wisdom is not my product. So that was point number one. But more importantly, I like products that are a pleasure to consume. And therefore, I'm not agnostic on that one. And that is what really led me to beauty and fashion and some of the related industries in luxury that I later went to.
Has it always been luxury, or is it, you mean the pleasure to consume at sort of any moment?
First of all, I should say I don't like to even use the word luxury because I think inherent in that is such snobbery. I'm crazy about Muji, and that's not a luxury retailer.
I love Muji.
I love it. And even if I buy nothing in there because I don't dress utilitarian, I love going there. Mm-hmm. I love that they were able to take the most sort of commodity-like things, if it's a toothpaste or toothbrush or a rain jacket, something that is just sort of as generic looking as possible, and give it that twist that gives it like the Muji style. I love that. Mm-hmm. So and to me, that is a form of luxury, although it doesn't fall in the classic definition, because it's not about price, but it's about the twist. Mm-hmm. So I would say more important than the idea of drawn to luxury was the drawn to businesses that are built on great design, on immersive experiences, on sort of a coherent approach to storytelling, on sort of 360 branding, like all of that, which also is a big defining element of what we think of as luxury today.
Absolutely. And I think luxury is changing today, especially with the rise of AI at the moment, because I think a lot can be easily replicated in a lot of senses. And so having a strong brand and having a strong point of view and strong storytelling, it's getting less and less, clear out there.
Well, for sure. But I would say there's also a flattening of what people are experiencing as quasi-luxury, or for that matter, even brand impact. For that reason, though, when you go into a store today that delivers well, and I would say, honestly, about 1 out of every 100 stores I go into is really a joy to be in. I over-reward them. It is why Hermès is so unstoppable. There is no rational sort of justification for that price point, and not just the ultra rich, but especially the ultra rich. But boy, do people do what they can to be able to buy a piece of it. They do it really well.
They really do. And I want to ask you some questions about the different fashion houses a little later once we get through your...
Go at it. I'm a big critic, by the way. I just was, fawning over Hermès, but I have to say, even within the industry that has done it well historically, a lot of them have gotten very sloppy and greedy.
I think I noticed that because as you were saying Hermès, I did a class, the Wharton class about luxury branding in Paris, and we were there for a week in May. And I went to Hermès, and it was just, there were so many people that it wasn't a good experience. But when we spoke to the CEO, she was very much about craftsmanship. That was her whole line. She really wouldn't, stray from that line. And then at Chanel, it was more so about redefining the French girl and their new, design and everything there. And then at LVMH, it was very much like profit. So I'm curious for you, is that sort of like the tropes that you would also assign to them?
Well, part of the problem in that sequencing you've just shared is that LVMH is not a brand. It is a corporate parent.
Right.
I think if you had had a meeting with Dior, you wouldn't have heard about profit. Not to say they don't think about it, but they certainly wouldn't lead with that the way LVMH would. So when I describe myself as the quintessential New Yorker, I never describe myself as the quintessential American. And I think, you have to sort of peel the... a little bit peel the onion on this one. I would also say a lot of the houses that we could talk about, Chanel included, they've had eras where they've hit the ball out of the park, and then they've had many eras, including in recent years, where they've not. And the good ones withstand those bad years. A little bit like a good actor in Hollywood can, deal with a few busts in the movie industry, but if you're not a good one and you have one, you're probably not coming back. And so part of what we're talking about, the common thread across all of these European luxury houses, is that most of them have stood the test of time, and therefore there's enough goodwill that even under the wrong ownership or leadership, they still have a chance of coming back. The newer ones and many of the American ones that don't have that heritage and don't have the commitment to some of those principles around the storytelling or around the craft, they're much more vulnerable.
Absolutely. And it requires a lot of money to upkeep as well, even when you're in those economic downturns as well.
Yes.
But it is sort of that heritage and that time that gives something the true meaning of luxury. Is that what you'd say?
Well, to be clear, I've seen a lot of companies spend a lot of money for naught. So money does not get you luxury. It can even get you kind of lazy. It's a little bit like, like working out. There's no, I don't care how many peptides you take or if you're going to do GLP-1s, there's no replacing working out, getting sunshine, getting a good night's sleep. There are certain just fundamentals.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people either in the industry or more likely new to the industry can also forget in their effort to sort of hack their way into a premium brand status.
I feel like you can apply that to a lot of different industries as well.
That is true.
Yes.
That is true.
I'm curious, do you have any upcoming luxury brands or even brands that you are keeping an eye on in the moment? Like, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on like Jacquemus or The Row?
I respect both of those for different reasons, but I don't think either of them will ever be in the ranks of some of the other multi-billion-dollar houses that we're talking about. And that's an okay thing.
Yeah.
That's an okay thing. I mean, what The Row does well is restraint. It takes a lot of confidence to put out a line at that price point, at virtually Hermès price point, without a lot of heritage or celebrity activity around you, and to still have a big fan base. So I respect the restraint and the confidence, but it's still a small business.
Yeah.
And it's taken them a long time just to stay a small business. So there's always a trade-off a bit in these types of companies between commercializing and creating desirability, which is sort of some factor of demand exceeding supply. Jacquemus, obviously less inaccessible from a price perspective and from a product availability standpoint, but they're more entertainment, in my opinion. And where I'd give that brand a lot of credit is their ability to continually surprise and delight. When I said that a lot of brands with a lot of money can waste a lot of money, what Jacquemus does well doesn't take a lot of money. It takes ingenuity. It takes an original thinking. And I think even in the resurgence of Gucci when Alessandro Michele was still there, he applied a lot of original thinking that was sort of counter to where everyone else was going. And it was quite delightful at the time. Obviously, the company is now in a major downturn under new leadership, and we'll see if they can turn it around again. It's not going to be easy at the size that it's at. But Jacquemus, at the small size that it's at, continues to surprise and delight.
I really love that. And I think it goes back to what you said a little earlier about the twist being something that often is what makes you stand out. It's not necessarily following the rules either. So,
well, and on that, there's something I say, and this is very good for women out there who are kind of figuring out their own voice and trying to, muster up the confidence to show their full aesthetic selves. Is there's really, for me, there's only one thing in the world that I do better than anyone else. I think I might have even shared this with you before. It's only one thing, and shame on me if I don't do that one thing properly, and that's to be myself. It's the only thing. Any other skill set I would point to, any other decision that I've ever made, I'm going to find people who've done the same, maybe thousands, and done it better, and still are. Yeah. But so we kind of a little bit have to decide what is the one element of yourself, and it's a human element, and it's the one thing that AI can't replicate. Even if we have AI twins out there at some point, which is probably not that far out, they're still not going to be able to replicate the fullness of our human selves.
And thank God for that. So it's good that people, take that as a encouragement to continue to cultivate that version of themselves.
I think what people are getting freaked out about is not what they should or could be doing. It's the optics of what are other people going to perceive. In other words, if there's a twin of Pauline out there, who, to someone who doesn't know Pauline, is basically Pauline, what is that twin going to get away with? And I think that alarms people. But if Pauline, the real Pauline, says, the only one I really have to care about are the people who know me, and the people who are really coming to the person who is sitting here today, and in all her flaws, and wanting to see her in that form, I'm not competing with that twin. Yeah. So if we live for the audience, for the perception of who we are, then game over.
Precisely. And that's actually something we talked about on your show when we were talking about a lot of the women in your generation would be appalled to see how many women of our generation are sharing so much about their lives or being more shameless when it comes to showing up on the internet. But what it does is once you're cringe for a little bit of time or whatever, you get a lot of rewards on the other side of that. So I want to talk about for you and your career ascension, going from being at Bain to transitioning over to being a real corporate leader. So what were some of the big things that you had to go through during that time? So I'd love to know, when were you really, for the first time, seeing yourself as a true decision maker in your own world at work, but also in your own life as well?
So in my own life, I would say it came much earlier than in my work life. But let me just stay with the work life for a minute. And I think this answer will surprise you. The more senior I got in the ever-growing companies that I was in, the less agency I had. So it's a bit of a myth that once you're the CEO or the chairman, that you somehow control your destiny. When I was head of North America at LVMH, this regional unit alone had more than 25,000 employees. Wow. Now, I didn't know them all by name, and the vast majority of them would have never seen me. Many of them were working in the stores, across the country. But even if there were just a few hundred people that I had some direct impact on and deep interactions with, I was very much a servant leader. I never felt I owned my schedule. I didn't feel I owned decisions of what Pauline would do versus what needed to be done for the organization. And that was a frustration at times because there were a lot of interesting opportunities that maybe shaped the industry, and in some ways might have shaped it better than it's turned out. But that wasn't my role, and nor did I really have the agency to do that. I have never in my life felt more control and more empowered than in this last decade that I've been working for myself.
Really? Was there ever a time where you considered working for yourself previous to that?
It was tempting. And I was thinking, I think that when the light bulb went off for me early, when I first got to Estée Lauder post-Bain, and I was working in this, what was kind of a startup unit within the company called New Business Development. And we were in the beginning just like a 2-person department. And new business was very ill-formed. And it basically turned into a major M&A drive for the company. And over the close to decade that I was there, through the acquisitions that we did, which early on started with Bobbi Brown and Joe Malone, and sort of went all the way to the last deal I worked on was the Tom Ford Fragrance and Beauty license. That was an engine for the company. It didn't start out that way. It started out very experimental, very homegrown, very, amateur. The deals we were doing were too small to even get bankers involved. the family who still controlled the company didn't even trust bankers. So I was kind of making it up with a few colleagues. We were making it up as we went. What I saw, which really kind of set me off, is that I would do these deals, and I had a very fancy corner office in the GM building in Manhattan. I was working directly with Leonard Lauder, who was the CEO at the time. It was a multi-billion-dollar company, so there was all the prestige that came with that scale. And I'd be dealing with the likes of a Jo Malone, who had 2 points of distribution. She had a little shop in Mayfair, London, and she had a store within store in Bergdorf. She was doing combined less than $20 million a year. We knew that she was onto something because she was she was approaching the fragrance industry in a way that we'd never seen before, and there was a lot of buzz, even though it was tiny. We put a deal on the table, and it was not that different a structure of deal than was offered to Bobbi Brown before her and quite a few other entrepreneurs in the years subsequently. On the other end of it, these women were coming out what to me was an extraordinary amount of money. They're making tens of millions of dollars, sometimes in hundreds. Nowadays, if you look at women in the cosmetic industry, the handful of women, like Ahila Yang, who founded Sol de Janeiro and sold it, she's worth 9 figures. And I sort of started to feel a little bit like a sucker, like a loser. Like, here I am with all the prestige that came with it, and I loved my job. But the value was being created by these women. In some cases, I'd be talking to people, and they just were hairdressers with a great idea, a makeup artist with a great idea. And I had all this education, and I still was on a salary with a modest bonus. So, and I'm not saying money was the driver. It was more of a symbol of who it was getting rewarded. Now, flash forward a couple of decades to where I am now, and I'm not worth 9 figures. But what I can tell you is it isn't about money, but it is about the rewards, whatever measure you're using. And I think I saw in those entrepreneurs early on that they were creating their own destiny in a way that I feel today I'm creating my destiny, and I don't ask anyone for permission. No one. And I love it.
I love that. I love hearing it, and also that like it can happen at any different point in your life.
Yes.
And I'm curious, do you feel like you say it wasn't about money? So do you think at the time though, or if you were talking to someone, maybe to myself or someone in my generation, would you say, what is the value in a corporate job versus, going out and doing something for yourself?
Yeah. Well, what I see, so I have 2 kids. One is in graduate school. One is finishing up college. So I also have proximity to, a generation that's a bit younger than you, but close in age. There's a bit of a rush. So had I tried to do what I'm doing today, even 10 years, I did start the process 10 years ago, but really just started. Had I tried it 20 years ago, it wouldn't have played out that well. And I don't think it takes 30 years for women like yourself to get there. But I think what's missing for many of the young men and women who want that agency from the get-go is that they haven't built any domain expertise. So they have the ambition, they have the energy, they have the smarts, obviously the work ethic. But whatever it is that they're trying to do doesn't have the benefit that comes with time and lived experience and having seen and experienced also failures. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, the ambition alone without the readiness and the readiness in alignment with what the world is ready for is also a problem. If the world is going into one direction and you're ready to go into that direction, and you may have the edge through some experience or connection, that's golden. And that's when we start to see, the next generation of whether it's a Bill Gates on the technology end or, a Zuckerberg on the technology end to a new generation of a Henry Ford or a Walt Disney. I mean, they're going to come, and they're not. And I think that what is very exciting about the world we live in today is that it's a lot more age agnostic. So if I had tried to do what you do 30 years ago, I would have been dismissed because I was, a 20-something or even a 30-something woman. I don't think that the assumption that at 20-something or 30-something you can't do it is there anymore. But I do think the lack of content, of original content and deep domain expertise often is.
I completely agree. But I would not have been able to take that in at like 21.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Because there's so many people who are rushed by the Forbes 30 under 30 of it all, or even just wanting to feel like they need that legitimacy so fast and so early in their career. And so, but what I've learned now is I feel like I stagnated in growth as a creator while I was in business school, of course, because you can't do it all at once. And I got a little upset. And then I started thinking to myself, like, oh, actually, I got an entire degree while this was happening, which is also just as valuable as how many ever followers I would have grown at the time. But at the same time, now I'm ready for growth in a way that I wasn't 2 years ago. And that's only something I think you can learn over time. It's even more important to remind people of that, and also to remind people that there are going to be hard times and failures as well, and not to be afraid of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, to forgive yourself, to stay resilient, that is sort of a superpower for me. I've made my share of mistakes, but I've learned from all of them. I'm really only angry at myself when I repeat them. I'm not angry when I make them the first time. I can be upset, or it can hurt, certainly can be disappointed, but only when I see it turning into a pattern of a certain type of decision or interaction do I get hard on myself. So that would be one thing. And then the other thing is knowing that in those uncomfortable moments, it's also when the genius starts to come through. It's a little like Leonard Cohen says, it's through the cracks that the light gets in. Yeah. So knowing and being prepared for the setbacks, but also knowing and accepting that without the setbacks, you will not get there. You will not.
You really won't.
If you're listening to this show, you're an ambitious woman, and you probably already know how to do a lot. You know how to perform, you know how to achieve, you know how to look like you have it all together. However, you might not know how to slow down for long enough to ask the question, is this life actually aligned with the one that I say that I want? And that is why I created the Alignment Edit. It's a live in-person workshop that helps ambitious material girls go from chaotic ambition to intentional ambition. We get together for a couple hours to audit your current life and identify the assumptions that are quietly holding you back. We help you redirect your ambition towards something that actually feels good and sustainable. This is not a hustle seminar or a how to fix your life boot camp. It's sort of a reset. And after that, we vision board, drink wine, and bond over the realities of being an ambitious material girl. If you're tired of doing everything but still feeling a little bit off, this is your edit. For the latest Alignment Edit tickets, visit airbnb.com/AlexisBarber. I can't wait to meet you. Let's take this offline.
I'm curious for you, what was one of your most challenging professional moments, if you were comfortable sharing with us?
Oh, I mean, so many. I would say I was at a real low point when I was at the Carlyle Group. So I was, and not just because I really am not meant to be a private equity, a buyout queen. It is not my archetype. Because I'd done for a decade.
You said you love product.
I love product and I love deals. Like I do deals all the time. My motivation for doing deals is not to extract value. It's because I see a little bit the opportunity to, it's almost like the opportunity to put 1 + 1 = 4. Yeah. And that's exciting to me. So in my years at Estée Lauder, when I did a deal, 1 out of every several went bad. And it went bad as seen by the fact that we had to either close it down or divest that acquisition that we had spent, in some cases, millions of dollars a few years before. And we were really upset because when you exit a deal, you've failed. Move on because the net balance was still very, very good for the firm. When I got to Carlyle and we were a deal-making machine, I was sitting in a U.S. buyout, which at the time was going, the one buyout fund that I joined was, I think it was $6 or $7 billion that had to be put to work. And then the subsequent one was $13 billion.
Wow.
You don't celebrate when you do a deal. You celebrate when you exit the deal. And you celebrate when you exit the deal because that's when all the partners and the investors make money. And so I always felt like exiting the deal, I did the deal because I wanted to be part of something that I would grow. And I actually felt a little bit of like sadness when I'd exit, even though everyone was making gobs of money. That was not ever my personal motivation for doing a deal. I loved the affiliation. I felt that sense of ownership. I wanted to see where it could still go. I, wanted to help in the building of it. So when I got there, number one, I was just misaligned with all the other partners as to, I got that this is what business we're in, but I was misaligned as to what motivates me to do my best, the values. Secondly, it was a very unforgiving field in the sense that we were drinking from a fire hose. The buyout world was sort of phase one. I'm talking 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10. It was
very busy time.
Very busy time. Every deal in the consumer and retail sector, which is where I was playing, every deal of a certain size, came our way. And you don't pass any of them lightly. You really take a hard look. So we were working around the clock. I had 2 kids. When I joined, the younger of the 2 was maybe 1 or 2 years old.
Wow.
Missing out on the graduation from preschool. My daughter doesn't remember it. Mm-hmm. But I was paid at the time sitting in the office, and I didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
I didn't have a choice. And so I think the combination of the values that were driving the business that I was in and the other partners, and how, we were really both motivated and really demanded or commanded to work, combined with the lack of bandwidth and space for what was so important to me outside of that. Mm-hmm. And even in my most demanding corporate days, I always made time for friends. I always made time for personal interests. I always had a few hobbies or extracurriculars, not as many as I would have liked, because I'm still working in reality, and I still had to respect the stakes of the day job. But that was one phase of my life where there was no room for any of it.
And that really got to you?
So I left, mm-hmm. and they were shocked. Nobody leaves a partnership from Carlyle unless you have a health issue, where you really don't have a choice, like you cannot come into the office.
Wow.
Or I remember one partner saying to me, "Is it your marriage? Are you thinking maybe there was some sort of mental break?" Which, obviously I was under an incredible amount of strain, but I was not mentally unstable by making this decision. In fact, it was I felt like this epiphany. It was like clarity, but nobody walked. I never had made so much money before as those few years I was there. I will never make as much money again, I don't think. And I always say it was maybe the worst financial decision and the best life decision. I never look back.
I really think that's such an important thing for people to hear, is that it's not always about the money sometimes. And also, but it's about your life, because you're living your life at that point. Yeah. And it's your kids' lives too. It's
your kids' life, and time goes. And I can tell you, somebody who's now, a few decades past that stage, the stage that you're at, even though everyone, is obsessed with longevity and the prospect of our living to 100 has never been better, mm-hmm. we're still not going to live forever. And how I live, approaching 60, in my late 50s, approaching 60, these next many years is going to inevitably be quite different. Even if I continue to stay as healthy as I can, it'll be very different than how I could have lived in those 40s. Mm-hmm. And so for that, it really, as I go back to say, it was a great life decision. It was an important life decision. And it had really forced me to reframe what is wealth.
And it was also very bold, I would say, to leave a partnership.
Well, maybe if I had been othered, as the way I described it earlier in our conversation, it would have been impossible.
Yeah.
But I think when you come into a job where your identity isn't simply the role that you stepped into or the role of the tribe of the people around you, where you have sort of something that is rooted in a different history, a different sex in my case, mm-hmm. A different way of presenting myself to the world. I already went in never assuming that this was going to be my forever place. I just, thought initially it would be more sustainable than it proved out to be.
Absolutely. And so then how did you go about making the decision for your next move?
I took some time, mm-hmm. and it was the first time in my life, because I mentioned if we go all the way back to my Wharton days, I'm a worker. And of course, the voice, that super ego in my head was always, you don't leave a job if you don't have a job.
Yeah.
That was kind of the MO. It's not so much anymore. But I did. And I remember in the beginning, and I did take some time, and that was one of my important takeaways. I would not have landed the amazing opportunity I did later down the road if I hadn't taken time. If I rushed into something, it wouldn't have been the right thing. I would go to cocktail parties. I would still, I was friends with living in a Tony suburban New York town, and I had friends who either were high-level professionals or married to high-level professionals, and I would go to these events, and everyone would ask, "So what do you do?" And in the very beginning, I used to always say, it was just a gut instinct, like, "Well, I used to," or "until recently." And then one day I said, I have to stop. I don't even like the question, what do I do? I live. That's what I do. My definition of a life well lived is not what I get paid to do, and it isn't what my business card says. So I have to get over that. And secondly, I have to a little bit own that I'm doing something of value, even if it isn't a job at this point. So the next time I was at some black tie event and somebody said, "What do you do?" I turned, and I was kind of being cheeky, and I said, "Nothing." And I just said that I'm never going to be defensive about that question or the answer to that question again. What I ended up doing with the time, to answer your question, first of all, I went back to that counselor's exercise with
to
the cards.
100 things.
I like products. And even private equity is not a product. It's a process that extracts a lot of value from companies that make a lot of beautiful products and not so beautiful products. So that doesn't even count. I need to be closer to products and products I enjoy. I want to be with creative people, and there were a bunch of other things. Obviously, I was still living in New York, so that hadn't been taken away from me. And I liked so much of the experience when I was at Estée Lauder of working across a portfolio, not necessarily driving any one single business, but being in a sort of strategic position and being able to support the line managers. And I was ready to do something much more expansive. The opportunity came to join LVMH, and I thought, perfect. It's expansive by virtue of having 70 plus brands across all these different industries. You get to stay in New York. It's a very creative, or it's a business full of very creative and taste-driven people. It was a good fit at the time.
I'm glad. And so when you made that choice to start again, what did that do for your identity? Because it sounds to me like you're pretty self-reflective.
Yeah.
So also, what were you like journaling? Were you going to therapy? Were you going to different coaches? Like, how were you coming to all these realizations? Even I have to let go of work as my identity.
Yeah. I generally don't find the best answers by going into myself. I'm not that interested at this stage. I've been to therapy at times in my life. I'm not that interested, and maybe wasn't as of that era on my sort of psychoanalytic journey. I'm really more interested in the world around me and in connecting the dots between the culture I'm in, the things within that culture that are exciting me, interacting with people and understanding the genuine curiosity of how other people work and how I work within them. To answer your question, no, I didn't have a formal process, but I think at this point, my instincts were really well tuned to who I am, how I play, what I'm ready for, what I still need to learn. And with that sensibility and that wisdom, the answer became kind of clear.
I like that. Okay, so it's more so observing data that you're accumulating in the world.
Pattern recognition.
Pattern recognition.
Yeah. I mean, the book that I'm working on, which will be the second one when it comes out, it's all about decoding taste. And I always say, our individual taste, whatever it is, if you like country music, if you like classical music, if you like punk music, I don't care what the genre is. What I care is, A, that you find the best forms of that genre, right? That you are as discriminating within your taste quadrant, or probably many more than quadrants, and that B, that we connect the dots between what happened in the exposures at transformative times in your life that created that connection with that genre, right? That's how taste is born. And it's all pattern recognition. And I wouldn't have been ready to recognize those patterns earlier in my life, but now, it's pretty clear by the time you get kind of well into your 40s. Yeah. It was for me. We'll say, though, even then, going back into the job, and it was as perfect a job as I could envision at that point, it still didn't come without sacrifice. I mean, my kids were still young, elementary school. I remember my daughter, who had gotten used to me being at home for a while and loved it. She loved the attention and she's a real mommy's girl. And she was very upset. I think she was probably in like second grade. She was very upset that I was going back. And she basically was crying in school that day when I told her. And we'd, hired a lovely nanny, and she had to get ready for this next chapter. And the teacher said to her, well, what's your mother going to do? And she said, she's going to work for Louis Vuitton, which meant nothing to her at the time. She's second grade. And the teacher said, well, so she's going to go work in the store? She's like, I think so. I don't mean this as a snub. Like, to her, it was choosing being a saleswoman on the floor instead of staying home with her. And had, by the way, that been the calculus, hands down, I would have stayed home with her. I have great respect for salespeople, but the trade-off there is way too high. But the job was just so compelling and so one of a kind that I had to make the hard choice. But I do feel, unlike in my Carlyle days, I had more control and a more balance than I had known, if not, did not have complete balance.
That's what I was going to ask you next, was about your personal life.
Yeah.
And today, I think a lot of people hear a lot about balance, and they want to think that they can get to the highest levels in business with a balanced lifestyle. And so I'm curious for you, do you think it's possible to have a thriving personal life and still get to those levels?
No.
Or what trade-offs do you have to make?
No. I think it's possible in a lifetime. Look, I have two kids. They have done extraordinarily well. Not to say we didn't go through difficult teen periods. And to this day, I still get the occasional, Ma, I get those calls from wherever they are in the world. But when I look on balance, they are doing so well. So I don't look back and think, oh, those years that I didn't do this, or that, I was going through a divorce while they were both in their teens. Did that screw them up forever? Well, apparently not. They're not perfect, but they're great. And so, but I have 2 kids and they are thriving. And I still have a career, even though it doesn't look or feel like the career I had earlier. And I have friendships, and there are times of my life I've been able to invest a lot more in a big circle of friends. And there are times in my life I only have, time and space for 2 or 3 good ones. Mm-hmm. Shame on me if I have any time in my life where I don't have time for that many, right? I have no compassion for women who don't make time for friends. There's no excuse. And forget the friends and what they may need. Mm-hmm. You need them. And you can't expect that they're going to be there for you the day that you need them. Mm-hmm. You also have to give. It's like a garden, right? The garden doesn't bloom the day you plant it. And there's a lot of hoeing and weeding and all of this. But I think of my friendships as that. And sometimes the garden is blossoming and sometimes not so much, but there's always at least a few flowers in there. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, I do feel in balance. I have all the things that are most important to me, and I'm still continuing to invest in those. At any one time, no way. Mm-hmm. No way. I've always had to make trade-offs.
Always have to make trade-offs.
Yes.
I think it's very important that female friendship focus, because I don't know, have you seen the whole is having a boyfriend embarrassing thing? Yeah, I'm curious for you, when it comes to your priorities, were you overly focused, or were women actually in the industries overly focused on marriage? Because I think right now there's a sort of dichotomy. There's either the people who are very focused on being in a partnership and that be the main thing that they care about more than work, versus there's women who are like myself who are a little conflicted about it, where it's like, if I focus, energy on getting into a relationship, then it's going to take away from my career. And I don't know if I want to do that. And there's all of these different questions that you have to ask. And so
I think it's the wrong question. I think you have to start with the idea that as humans, we want companionship. End of story. There are maybe in every 100 people I'll meet, 1 or 2 that are really meant to live alone their entire life, happily. There are many more who end up living alone, and they can make a happy life. It's not what they would have wanted or ideal. And I'm not saying without companionship, you are miserable. But I think most people are at their best with good companionship. Now, we've all had marriages, seen marriages. I had one that ultimately were not the companionship that we need. So marriage for marriage's sake, partnership for partnership's sake is not at all gratifying. I think the question is really what kind of partnership you need. And what I found, for example, and this goes back to one of the early questions you asked me about, finding romance and dating while I was at Wharton. The men that I have done best with, and I've had really long-term healthy relationships with, let me be me. And I've dated men that are micromanaging or that are very needy. I don't want to take care of somebody at this stage. So I want a man who is very confident and self-sufficient in what he does best. At the same time, I don't want a man who can do without me. And it takes a little bit of work to find, if it's a man or a woman or whatever your preference, that person who fits with who you are at your best and who you fit with who they are at their best. Unless you're that one person out of 100 who really isn't meant to be with anyone, that you deserve and can find someone who's just right, but that person isn't necessarily going to be in the playground you're in. Yeah. And I go back to the plant analogy, the garden. If I, living in New York, plant a sunflower or a tropical thing that deserves, should be in Miami, it isn't going to thrive. Yeah. So I want to have a garden, but I have to have a garden that works where I am. And and where I am isn't just, the amount of sunshine that's out there, but it's the soil and it's the space. And what will thrive in my apartment is not the same things that will thrive outside my apartment. Mm-hmm. So you have to pick the right plant.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Men are just plants.
Men are just plants. That's going to be we'll make that the title.
But I believe in plant intelligence, by the way.
Ooh, yeah.
It's a big topic. We could have a whole show on that one.
Oh, we could. Well, I hope you should do one. You should do one. Okay, wow. This has been really, really helpful here, especially because sometimes you're just asking the wrong question, and I think that's a good thing for women.
I'm glad you came around.
Yeah, I'm coming around.
The one thing I will say on this topic, and it's an important thing, is that you and your peers have 2 advantages I didn't have. Mm-hmm. As young women, single women, sort of navigating the whole decision making around, do I have a family? When do I have a family? With whom do I have a family? And so forth. Number one, the science wasn't far along when I was in my 20s and 30s. It was probably in its nascency. So the number of younger female friends I have who have frozen their eggs or who are extending the pressure that I felt. By the time I was in my 30s, I felt like, oh my God, if I don't find the right person, game over. I will never have kids. And that was real. I couldn't talk myself out of that. And I really wanted kids. So I don't think it buys you 30 years. I don't think you would want to have kids when you're my age, but I do think it buys a bit time on that biological reality. I think the second thing is that there was much more of a stigma on being of a certain age, even in my corporate job, and still being single. Mm-hmm. So there's something wrong with her, And I love the body inclusivity movement, the idea that we don't have to fit a mold, that we can still be proud and confident. I love the idea that a woman can still be confident if she's single. I just don't think she should talk herself out of wanting something so natural as companionship.
I think that puts a lot into words that a lot of women need to hear. Yeah,
okay,
100%. Thank you so much. Oh, wow. I would love if we chatted a little bit about taste, since that's the book that you're writing at the moment. And it's also something that a lot of people, I talk to the people who are self-identified tastemakers, I'd say, the ambitious material girls. But for some people who may feel like they don't have a true point of view or that they don't have taste, what would you say to that?
Yeah. First of all, let's define what taste is. Because it is too often, especially in the influencer sphere, it is reduced to sort of superficial style.
Yes.
And that always makes me bristle. One of my favorite expressions is true style has substance. A lot of style out there doesn't, but real style has a lot of substance. And I go back to something I said to you earlier. Good aesthetics is just an outer expression of an inner value system. So telling me you don't have taste is telling me I don't have values. It's a little bit like saying I don't have a personality. Now, there are people who have a shy personality. There are people who have outgoing. There are people who are, creative personalities or loquacious. But we all have it, and we would never say. So I don't even like the thought process that I somehow don't have it. Really what you're saying is I don't have the kind of style that will get the followers, especially in my social feed, and that to me is not real aesthetics. Let's talk about what the word aesthetics is and why I actually use that word more often than even taste. It comes from the Latin aestheticos, which means perception of the senses. A word that is often associated, though you wouldn't think of it with aesthetics, is an anesthesiologist. Mm-hmm. So the role of an anesthesiologist is to numb your senses so when you go into surgery, you do not feel pain. Your role as an aesthet is to bring your senses, to heighten them so that you can feel things more pleasurably and express them more fully. Mm-hmm. That is taste. Number two, get rid of the idea that there's any sort of hierarchy, as I said before. But the point here is we have to look at it a little bit more like a muscle. There are a few people in the world who are born to be Olympic athletes, no matter how hard they work. But 100% of the population, if they work out and they follow a good, healthy routine, they will be more fit tomorrow than they were yesterday. It's just sort of the body's, the laws of nature. And if you think of taste development as a bit of a muscle that has to be activated, that unfortunately doesn't get taught in school, doesn't even really get reinforced in school, because we're kind of very focused with what goes on up here and a lot of sort of information retention and things that are probably irrelevant in the age of AI, although this particular thing is more relevant in the age of AI. So I am a big believer that there's a lot of things that people could be doing, should be doing, to continue to exercise their own personal taste muscles. And the third thing I would say is a little bit like there's no shortcuts to developing wisdom or to finding your true breakthrough success. It takes time. It takes making mistakes and a little experimentation along the way, but it takes doing. If you decide not to, and there are people out there who say this stuff doesn't matter to me and I'm not even going to try, in and of itself, that's a taste judgment. You're telling the world what you care about.
Absolutely. So what are some of the ways that people can exercise that taste muscle?
Yeah. So In the course that I had been teaching on and off for many years, and I wrote about it in the first book I wrote called Aesthetic Intelligence, I broke down the muscles into sort of 4 concrete steps. The first one is very basic, but it's important, and that's about attunement. It's about resensitizing yourself to all the stimuli that is hitting you all the time that we have trained ourselves to overlook and to dismiss. If you're having a meal, are you really tasting the food? Are you listening? Is the reason that maybe you're feeling anxious in that restaurant having nothing to do with the person on the other side of the table, but the fact that the acoustics are so bad and the music is too loud? Is the quality of the light in the room something that is enhancing the experience, or is it actually diluting it? The more sensitive you are to your surroundings, toward even how things fit on your body. People who we see as moving through the world, like a lot of people right now are hearkening back to Carolyn Bessette. What gave her great style was not any one item of clothing that she picked off the shelf. It was that she moved with her clothing in such symmetry, right? And harmony. I think because we live in such a visual time, that people aren't experiencing taste through their bodies enough, and therefore they're not that attuned to how things feel, in space.
Yeah.
So these are all things with a sensitivity. The second thing is what I call interpretation. So it's not just feeling the difference between how things are in your body or what you like and don't, but it's actually starting to do a bit of analysis. Why did I like that restaurant better than that restaurant? Why is my dream vacation to go to a beach instead of to go shopping in a city like Paris? The more in touch you are just with the thought process that connects the emotions, great. The third is what I call curation, knowing that if you have to make trade-offs, that you can only do a few things in your life. We can't all afford to go to the Maldives tomorrow, but we can afford to go to Jones Beach here in New York. What are the decisions that we are going to make? And how do we curate our life within the constraints we have? That's 90% of good style is about curation. And then the third, or the fourth, I should say, which is what people in business have to do particularly well and often don't, is what I'll call articulation. How do I articulate with words, but also with symbols, what is important to me, what I'm trying to say through all of my stylistic decisions? So those are the 4 things. But again, if you're interested, the book kind of spells it out in much more detail.
Absolutely. I took a look at it. I think people will really like that. And I think it's very important today. And can you talk to us a little bit more about why you think aesthetic intelligence is so important in the age of AI?
Because it is the antithesis of AI. I call it the other AI, aesthetic intelligence, the other AI. AI is birthed out of a system that is driven by efficiency, by processing enormous systems of data, or banks of data, I should say, by processing them in a way that is logical and structured, and obviously doing it very quickly. It does that incredibly well. And if you are in a field that is competing with any one of those dimensions, which is unfortunately a lot of STEM, game over, you've lost. Already the AI systems have, and they have for many years, been showing that they can do this much better, much cheaper. If you go to any of the AI systems today, and specifically I'm thinking I was playing the other day trying to create a document on Midjourney, which is one of the visual to or text to visual AI systems. It's so crude. And I don't even think it's where AI as we know it, ChatGPT as we know it, was 5 years ago on the repurposing of text, because it's not human. While AI is getting better and better at replicating human, it is not getting better and better at being human. It still isn't sentient. And I mentioned earlier that there is something called plant sentience and plant intelligence. Plants do not have a brain. They don't have a neurological system. But their ability to survive and thrive in ecosystems, to adapt with changing conditions, is something that we humans have to double down on. We have to be doing much better at that. So aesthetic intelligence is one of those things that it's not about taste alone. It's about using parts of our brain that are that which data analytics doesn't use. There are 7 sort of types of intelligence that sit under aesthetic intelligence. One of them is naturalistic intelligence. What's an example of naturalistic intelligence? Someone who is a Sherpa in Nepal who understands the mountain and who navigates it, not just through obviously intensive experience, but really understands the way the winds are working and the way the sort of folds of the mountain are laid out, and can guide people through that in a way that makes them indispensable. I can tell you AI is not replacing Sherpas on the mountains of Nepal. Jacques Cousteau, he had an understanding of the deep waters that allowed him to make real-time decisions as he was going into the depths and understanding sea life. So that is one. I could go on in the other 6 types. So you have to kind of think about what are the types of intelligence that are not replicative, but that are dealing with parts that make us as, not just as humans, but really as living beings, quite exceptional.
Absolutely. I think people will love this book. I think if they want to take a look at that to get an idea of just seeing their own value, because with AI and technology, a lot of the value that we're placing out in society is around like how efficient you can be. Whereas there's other forms of intelligence that a lot of, particularly women, I'm sure you would say, that we don't get the credit for. It's also sort of like why we look at the influencer industry with this sort of skepticism, because it's a lot of women doing it as well. And because a lot of it has to do with aesthetics, which are sort of sometimes looked down upon. So what would you say to that for people who are like, it's not about what it looks like, it's about how it functions?
Well, I think times are changing. And I think, yes, for decades, professions that were more natural extensions of sort of feminine instinct and that were for reasons of lifestyle or tradition, more occupied by women, were more sort of seen as women's domains, have been devalued. If I were to look at what we need going forward, for example, the caring economy, I don't want a robot as a nanny for my child.
Oh, no.
And I would pay a lot of money for a good nanny, but anything that the robot can do, including maybe even, doing certain basic housework, I'm not going to pay for. It's going to go down to zero. It'll go down to zero for me to eat a McDonald's-like meal. But if I want a Michelin star meal, I need the artistry of a chef who is making real-time decisions in the kitchen that are unexpected, that would have nothing to do with what that chef might have been taught in culinary school. I mean, that's art, right? And I just don't think it's even, certainly not in my lifetime, do I think that these systems will get close at the level of artistry and connectedness, human-to-human connectedness that I've just described.
Absolutely.
And so I'd like to think, going back to your question about women, that the things that we have always done more naturally will inevitably have more value. I think it's incumbent on us as women to command the value.
Oh, absolutely. And so I'm curious, for women who are in this really great opportunity where there's AI taking off, there's creator economy, there's a lot more opportunity for us to go out on our own. What are some skills you learned from your time at LVMH, your time at Estée Lauder and at Carlyle? These really, you would call them masculine or whatever, or these very, difficult corporate environments to be in. Are there transferable skills such as like sales or people management that you'd recommend women really invest in, whether they decide to stay in the corporate world or work for themselves?
The reality is, I have friends from college and business school who dropped out of the workforce, often early in their motherhood years. But they might have been very active in a nonprofit. They certainly were active in, parent-teacher associations and such. Their salesmanship was as strong as many, head of, sales organizations and big corporations, because they've had to work with people and they've had to kind of organize with different incentives. So I don't look at anything that I learned in those big companies as something I could not have learned elsewhere. Would I have had the, the pedigree and maybe the credibility to get on a board today or do other things that still pay the bills, that are still have some semblance of prestige? No, but I don't think the actual raw skills were something I needed in those roles.
Interesting.
I would look at the question through the other lens, which is the reason I have been able to reinvent myself post-corporate in a way that I can't think of too many colleagues who left the likes of Carlyle and then didn't just become retired private equity guys, or left the likes even of big, more aesthetic businesses like Estee Lauder or LVMH or L'Oreal, and then become book authors or professors or podcasters or Substack writers, which is what I do, not through any one job, but through the transitions that I made time and again, was the agility to be able to jump in and figure it out. And maybe a little bit the guts to just say, I don't quite know what this is about. By the way, I don't know what media is about. I've been doing old-fashioned radio at SiriusXM for a few years. I just started, around the same time you did Substack, but I'm not diginatal. I'm like figuring this stuff out as I go. And some of it is not going to work out right. But I kind of have this underlying confidence that enough of it will.
And I also think you haven't been afraid to try.
I'm not afraid.
Yeah,
I'm not afraid.
to try.
And so maybe that would be my advice,
Yeah.
is don't let fear govern.
Yeah.
Don't let fear govern. Be sensible. Know that, everything comes with some risk, calculated risks. Don't make ones that, are going to get you into deep, deep trouble. But a little trouble's okay.
A little trouble's okay. I love that. Okay, now you are a material girl is what I like to call everyone. You have incredible taste and your place is wonderful. You've worked in some beautiful companies. So I have to ask you material girl
Ask me
questions.
material girl questions.
So a few to start off with, like, how do you approach beauty when it comes to your makeup? Are you someone who's trying new things all the time, or even skincare? Or are you someone who is very loyal to the things you were using, say, back in the 90s?
I'll try anything, and I still have a lot of friends in the industry, so I get it for free. I wouldn't buy in this day. I'm a little fatigued by the proliferation of products, and I walk into Sephora, and I'm like,
I was going to say, do you go to Sephora?
I can't. I occasionally, but I walked in not long ago with my 21-year-old daughter, and she too was like, get out of here.
Yeah.
That I don't like. But if presented with products or recommended with products, I'll try anything. I'll also be quick to throw things out or to give things away. If I try it and and not just because it doesn't look good, but I don't. So, for example, one trend I never embraced: really glossy lipstick. I like the way it looks on others, but I don't like the way it feels as a talker.
Okay,
right. I don't like the kind of the this thing that goes on. So I don't like that hyper gloss. So it has to feel right on me. I don't want to feel like whatever I've tried is going to make me self-conscious, but I'll try anything. What dictates what I wear, assuming I've tried it once, and some things I'll come back to, and some things I kind of am very quick to get rid of because I'm decisive. The things I'll come back to, it's largely what I'm in the mood for. I find, for example, there are days, this has been a long winter here in New York.
Oh, it's been a long winter.
It's been cold.
It's been terrible.
And gray, and the geopolitical climate is only making things worse.
Truly.
And so if I didn't do little things, there are days where I'd be like so prone to feel sluggish and depressed. And so I'll just put a bright lip on.
Yeah.
And not because I think that's exactly what I should be wearing. I don't necessarily like the way it looks in a picture. It's a little harsh, but it just makes me feel like I got a little, a little life left in me. So some of it is trying to counterbalance the mood I'm in and with the mood I'm aspiring to feel.
Absolutely. Were you doing that while you were in your corporate jobs too? Was that part of it? A little bit?
A bit. I mean, certainly my years at Lauder and at LVMH, it behooved me to be experimental.
Yeah.
But there were certain things you didn't do. Like if you put a spritz back in the day, and I suspect it's still this way. In some ways, I hope it is. But if I was at Lauder and you put a spritz of Chanel No. 5 and walked down the hall, like that is a no-no. If you were, I remember hearing about one woman who was very close to, she was high up in the admissions, or I wish I say selection process, to have a very senior job at Dior. And she went in for a final round and she was carrying a Prada bag. It didn't take more than 15 minutes for, Arnaud to say, I don't have time for this woman. Now, that's a little harsh. Actually, it was a very nice Prada bag, but that's not the point. The point is you have to kind of know your audience, and I worked within that, which doesn't mean I was wearing, an LVMH brand head to toe, but it was a little bit of a nod to the company. Yes. And if it wasn't a brand for the company, I was aware that it didn't, have a Gucci label. Yeah. In general, I don't like being a billboard for any brand. So you will really never see me, even if I'm not working in the company and I have the luxury nowadays to not be beholden to anybody, you'll never see me walking around with double C's or double G's. Because I feel like, you know what? You should pay me. I'm not advertising you.
Exactly.
You may get paid, by the way, but nobody's ever paid me.
Well, when Chanel wants to pay me, I will gladly.
Okay, yeah. I'm with you on that. And until then, I want things that may come from the brand, but still kind of signal that it's mine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's incredible. So what are some of your favorite beauty products?
Oh, today. Ooh, I never thought I'd be a convert because it's sort of so against much of what I talk. I like to be the anti-trend goer. Like I like to be the tried and true in a way, but I do quite like Rhode.
I do too.
It's good.
I really like it
And
too.
I don't like it. I don't like Beaver Girl.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I was a Justin Bieber fan growing up, but the Rhode, I was at an Elf beauty dinner and they gifted me the whole set, and I've been using it every morning. And let me tell you, like, as someone with dry skin, it's really, really good.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's good. So I'm enjoying that. And I also, funny enough, so when you're in the industry, if you don't get a freebie, and you get a lot of freebies, certainly in the beauty industry, I had closets. Because I was new business development, so I was sort of the gateway to coming into the company for all these independent brands. And then at LVMH, I had a stipend, and I'd go to sample sales. And sample sales, which are not open to the public, sometimes I'd be able to get ready to wear 90% off. And by the way, when I went through one of my downsizing in a big move from a big house to a small apartment, I remember calling a Real over, and they left the house at the time with 85 pieces. Had I known how little would trickle back to me, by the way, I would have.
Oh yeah, you don't get.
I would have given it away to friends.
Yeah.
So I'm not proposing that you go to Real, but I'm saying I had a lot of stuff, and you become in the process a bit desensitized to how expensive this stuff is. And now I go through life. And I've done well, but I am not at the level where I don't look at a price tag. And I probably, even if I was worth multiples of what I am, I will never be at that because I will always remember from whence I came and the fact that, all four of my grandparents were refugees. So there's a part of me that still cares a lot about value. So I look at the price. And I have to say, most of what I look at, and I was on the board of Neiman Marcus, so I, frequently go into Bergdorf Goodman, which is a sister brand of Neiman's. And I was shocked how expensive even a classic handbag has become. It's just not worth it. I think it's why fine jewelry is doing so well, because at least fine jewelry holds its value. I will not, as much as I love it, I'm not going to spend $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 on a bag. I have a lot, and they're nice. And so going back to your question, I still think a lot about value, but I also don't want to buy a copycat of that $6,000 bag, because then I'm not valuing myself. What I will do, I was at Peru with my family for the Christmas holidays, and they have some very nice leatherware down there. I will find things. Not everything I saw is something I would carry around the streets of New York. Mexico City has some beautifully made accessory brands. I love Mexico City. I do too. Yeah. And I saw a lot of things. So I've kind of developed a bit of an eye for discovery, but still within whatever amount I'm comfortable spending, quality.
Absolutely. And I mean, as someone who was doing all that new business development back in the day, are there any brands you've spotted that you're like, oh, I think that they might be something big right now?
So one of my favorite brands, and it's not commercial yet, so it has a lot of work to do, and it's small. It's really small. And I was at India twice the last year, and it is an Indian brand. And it is they're mostly known for its exquisite saris, which is not going to translate outside of India.
Right.
But the jewelry, the ready-to-wear, exquisite, but the real thing that caught my attention and why I think it could be a sort of a century in the making was the world building, and that is Sabyasachi.
Ooh, okay.
Sabyasachi is a brand from India, from Calcutta, has some extraordinary flagships, the newest and most impressive one in Mumbai, but also in Delhi. You walk in, it's like walking into this genie bottle that is maybe 10,000 square feet, so not small spaces. There isn't an inch of that genie bottle, and through its nooks and crannies that isn't thought through and hyper decorated. It won't be everybody's taste, but I don't think anyone can go in there without understanding the world that Sabyasachi himself is creating.
Wonderful. And I think that's good advice to anyone who's building a brand, to focus on being thoughtful about your world building.
Create the world, know the world, even if you don't. I mean, Sabyasachi himself comes from a very modest background. The way you see his stores today would look nothing like this if I had, looked at his spaces 10 years ago. But he always had the vision. So I think start with a really well crystallized vision, and then start to layer on it. It doesn't have to be perfect from the beginning, but it has to be honest, and it has to be original.
Honest and original. Okay. We will wrap up with a couple of rapid fire questions because I know we've been at this for a while, but I'm so happy because I could actually do this again because we haven't even gotten into like deals and everything in your time in your corporate world. But we'll do a little bit of our rapid fire moment to wrap up.
Okay.
So
go for it.
Starting off, what is your favorite lip combo at the moment? Or what are you wearing now?
What am I wearing now? Yeah, because I answered before that it was so
like a
mood
break.
contingent. Here's my routine. I always put on basically a clear, it's not chapstick, but it may as well be, but it's just sort of a clear, smooth layer. Mm-hmm. I use a pencil I like. The pencil I'm using right now, I bought it in CVS. It might be Elf or Revlon. It's a berry color. I couldn't even tell you the name because I just sort of start with the texture and the shade as seen on the shelf. I outline the lip. And then sometimes I will dab a little lipstick on top, sometimes not.
Okay, love it, love it. All right, what's an unexpected thing that's always in your bag or your purse?
Oh, a pen. I keep saying I'm not a snob. I'm a little bit of a snob on pens, and by that I don't mean that it's an expensive pen, but I am very particular about what pens I use and how I like them on the page, and I still do write. I believe a lot in the power of pen to paper. Mm-hmm. The ones that I always use, my favorites, which I buy in bulk, are those Precision 5s, usually in black or blue. I like them because I like how they feel in the hand and I like how they go on the paper.
I'm the same. I'm very particular with pens. Yes. It's important.
It's important.
Real ones know. What are you listening to on repeat right now? It could be a song, podcast, anything.
Yeah. So I am addicted to the Daily. Yeah. I'm also addicted to reading the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal every day. I don't recommend it for anyone who's prone to depression because every day the news seems to get worse than the day before. And I can't not. I just feel like it's the one thing I do short of travel that grounds me in the world I'm living in, however tough many of the stories I listen to and read are still in this moment in time.
It's important. It's good to know. But yes, if you're prone to depression, you've got to limit it a little bit. Absolutely. So what is your signature accessory?
You wouldn't know it from today, but heavy bangles. And I have a lot of bracelets. I don't like a lot of weight around my neck. I tend to go with more delicate pieces here. I at times go with much more dramatic and heavier earrings, although I probably shouldn't because I won't have a pierce anymore left. But one thing I will never give up is lots of really statement pieces on my wrist, and usually I like to stack them and in unexpected ways.
Do you have a specific place you get them from, or do you do cheap and cheerful too?
All over. I mean, there's some that are, and some of them have been gifted. My partner gifted me, and he's gifted me jewelry, some of which, if it's too, don't tell him, by the way, if it's too delicate, I don't end up wearing it. But he, early on in our relationship, gave me a Hermes bracelet. It's not fine jewelry, but it's one of those cuffs, and it just works usually in combination with a lot of other things. I often call them my Wonder Woman cuffs. They're just, keeps me strong.
It's good to have something like that.
I like the weight on my wrist.
Absolutely. Okay, what is one wellness habit that keeps you sane?
So I mentioned earlier that I read the New York Times every day. I also do the New York Times crossword every day. I've been doing it for many decades. I've gotten to the point where I only really enjoy it and sort of look forward to Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but I still do it every day. It's a ritual, a little bit like meditating for me. Starts my day right.
I love that. That's wonderful. What is the best book you've ever read?
Well, I was an English major, so I've read early in my life quite a bit. And, had you asked me when I was 12, I probably would say something stupid like, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. The most fascinating book I've read in the last many years, reference a lot, is Homo Sapiens.
Okay.
Yuval Noah Harari. Brilliant. As you can tell from this conversation, I try to understand who I am and who we all are in the context of the culture we live in and the history that we were that we've inherited. And I think it does a better job than any other book I've read in really contextualizing a few thousand years, actually many thousand years of human history.
Well, I think we will recommend it. We'll leave it linked for everyone. What is a hot take you have about being an ambitious woman?
I don't think the healthy ambition starts with ambition. I think it starts with an unstoppable interest and high energy. So I would encourage people to think about it because ambition always implies that you're striving for something. Interest and energy implies what you're prepared to do for something. And it's a little more action-oriented, and it's also a little purer in its intentions.
I think being action-oriented is something that a lot of people get or aren't doing at the moment. And I think it's very important to remind ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can tell you this. If you don't try, you have 0% chance of getting to wherever your ambition might lead you. If you try, you may not get all the way there, but you at least started the process and you have a chance.
And you've got data that'll help you get there, hopefully. Right. All right. Last one is to finish this sentence for our listeners. You are too smart for...
Oh, yeah. I'm too smart to take any of this so seriously.
I love that.
Including and especially myself.
Exactly. I think that's perfect to end on. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Where can everyone find you if they want to stay up
Well, I have a
to date?
Substack. It's under Aesthetic Intelligence. And they can also find me on Instagram at Pauline Brown.
Lovely.
Garris is my maiden name.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Too Smart for This. Make sure you're subscribed to our Substack and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at 2Collective. Don't be stupid. Listen to Too Smart for This.